She didn't know it yet, but the night she curled up in the back seat of her car, using a rolled-up jacket as a pillow and a grocery bag as a blanket, was the same night her real life quietly began, even though at that moment it felt like everything had ended. Maya had always believed that endings came with noise, like loud fights, slammed doors, or dramatic goodbyes. But her marriage fell apart in such a deep silence that it felt unreal, like watching a building collapse in slow motion without making a sound. 6 months earlier, she had still been living in a warm, neatly kept home filled with the small comforts she had spent years building. There was a coffee maker that started brewing every morning at 6 o'clock. There was a couch that had molded perfectly to the shape of her body. There were shelves lined with books she never finished, but liked having nearby. Aaron would come and go, offering polite smiles and faraway conversations. And even though something between them had quietly shifted, she kept telling herself this is what long-term love looked like, quieter, less urgent, but still there. Until one evening, standing in the kitchen under a dim yellow light, he said without emotion, without hesitation, as if he were just commenting on the weather, "I don't think I want this anymore." She had waited for more, for an explanation, a reason, something she could hold on to, but nothing else came. There was no betrayal she could point at, no single moment she could blame, just a slow drifting apart that, she realized too late, he had finished navigating long before she even knew they were lost. The legal process that followed was cold and efficient, like someone sorting their shared life into neat categories and clauses. The house, she learned, had always been in his name. The savings accounts were set up in ways she didn't fully understand, not until it was far too late. Even the car she drove every day had paperwork she had never paid attention to. By the time the divorce was finalized, Maya found herself standing in a nearly empty apartment she could no longer afford, surrounded by a few packed bags and the echo of a life that no longer belonged to her. Pride kept her from calling her friends. Shame kept her from telling her family the full truth. So she made a choice that didn't really feel like a choice at all. She moved into her car, telling herself it was only temporary, just until she figured things out. But days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months. Living in a car wasn't just uncomfortable. It was confusing in a way she had not expected. The world looked different when you didn't have a place in it. She learned which parking lots were the safest, which security guards looked the other way, and which public restrooms stayed open late enough for her to wash her face and pretend for a few minutes that she was still part of normal life. She kept her belongings organized with almost obsessive care, as if keeping order in that tiny space could somehow hold her together. Some nights, she would lie awake, staring at the ceiling just inches above her face, listening to distant traffic and wondering how everything had unraveled so completely without her noticing. Sometimes she would drive past her old neighborhood, slowing down just enough to catch a glimpse of the house through the trees, its windows glowing softly in the evening light. It looked unchanged, untouched, as if her absence had never meant anything at all. And that was the part that hurt the most, not the loss itself, but how easily the world around her seemed to absorb it. She began to feel invisible, like she had quietly slipped out of her own life, and no one had even noticed. Old conversations played over and over in her mind, as she searched for clues she might have missed. She looked for moments where things could have gone differently, but they all blurred together into the same unanswered question. When did she stop mattering? The loneliness settled deep, heavier than the physical discomfort, heavier than the uncertainty of what came next. Yet even in that quiet collapse, something stubborn stayed alive inside her. Not hope exactly, but a flat refusal to disappear completely. She woke up each day, found small ways to keep going, took temporary jobs, saved what little she could, and told herself over and over that this wasn't permanent. Still, there were moments when doubt crept in, whispering that maybe this was all there was now, that this smaller, narrower existence was a consequence of choices she didn't even remember making. And then, just when the days had begun to blur into something she barely recognized, when she had nearly accepted that this was her new normal, an envelope arrived, plain, unremarkable, but carrying a weight she couldn't yet understand. The envelope sat on her passenger seat for nearly an hour before she touched it, as if opening it too quickly might somehow make whatever was inside more real, more permanent. and she wasn't sure she could handle another shift in a life that already felt like it had been stripped down to its last fragile layer. It was thin, unmarked, except for her name written in a handwriting she recognized instantly. A constant hum of movement and expectation filled the courthouse, the kind she had grown used to. She approached slowly, each step measured, the key pressed firmly in her hand, as if letting go of it might break whatever fragile connection had brought her here. And when she reached the door, she hesitated, not out of fear, but because she understood in some quiet, instinctive way that whatever waited on the other side would change something, even if she didn't yet know what. Still, she lifted her hand, guided by something deeper than logic, and slid the key into the lock. It fit perfectly. The click that followed was soft, almost quiet, but it echoed through her in a way that felt anything but small. And when she pushed the door open, she wasn't met with emptiness or decay, but with light, warm, steady light that filled the space as if it had been waiting for her all along. Inside, everything was simple but complete. A small kitchen, a narrow staircase leading to a loft, a table by the window, and a chair positioned to catch the sunlight. And for the first time in months, Maya felt something shift inside her. Not relief exactly, not yet, but a loosening, a quiet unraveling of the tension she had been carrying for so long that she had forgotten what it felt like to be without it. She stepped inside carefully, as if the space might disappear if she moved too quickly. Her eyes took in every detail, every carefully placed object, until they landed on something resting at the center of the table. Another note, older this time, the edges slightly worn, as if it had been handled many times before being left there. She picked up slowly, her fingers brushing against the paper with a kind of quiet respect she didn't fully understand. And when she unfolded it, the words written inside didn't come from Aaron. They didn't carry the same distance or ambiguity, but something entirely different, something that felt closer, more intentional, for when you're ready to start over. Not the life you planned, the one you choose. The room seemed to settle around her as she read it. The silence was no longer empty, but full, and for a moment, she simply stood there, the key still in her hand, the note open before her, realizing that whatever this place was, whatever it had been before, it wasn't an accident, it wasn't an afterthought, and it certainly wasn't just a leftover piece of Aaron's life. It was something else entirely, something she didn't yet have the words for, but could feel begin to take shape in the quiet space around her, as if, after months of drifting without direction, she had finally opened a door that had been waiting for her long before she even knew it existed. She told herself it was temporary. That first night in the tiny house, she didn't even unpack her bag, just placed it near the door like she might need to leave quickly, like staying too long would somehow make this feel real in a way she wasn't ready for. She moved through the space carefully, almost cautiously, as if she were a guest in someone else's life, running her fingers along the smooth wooden surfaces, opening drawers just to confirm they were real, standing by the window longer than necessary because the quiet outside felt unfamiliar in a way that was both comforting and unsettling at the same time. And when she finally lay down in the loft, staring up at a ceiling that didn't press down on her the way the roof of her car had, she didn't fall asleep right away, not because she was uncomfortable, but because, for the first time in months, she didn't have to stay alert. She didn't have to listen for footsteps or passing headlights or the sudden knock that meant she had overstayed her welcome somewhere she was never meant to be. The silence here was different, not empty, but full, and it took her a while to trust it. Morning came slowly. Soft light filtered into the wide windows, steady and gentle, not harsh or intrusive, and for a few disoriented seconds, she forgot where she was. Her body was still holding on to the habits of survival, waking up quickly, checking her surroundings, bracing for movement. But then the memory of the house settled into her, not as a shock, but as a quiet realization, and she exhaled in a way she hadn't in a long time, deep and unguarded, as if something inside her had finally been given permission to loosen. She stayed that day, and the next those small things that stop you from giving up, the quality of the light to the window, the steady hum of the refrigerator, ending each day in a place that was her own. Finally, even if she had to keep telling herself that this wasn't hers, that she couldn't just step into something like this and claim it as her own. But each evening she found a reason to stay just a little longer. She cleaned without thinking about it, wiped down surfaces, open windows, let fresh air move through the rooms as if the house itself needed to breathe again. And somewhere in those small, quiet actions, something began to shift. Not dramatically, not all at once, but steadily, like a slow rebuilding she hadn't consciously chosen to begin. Days turned into weeks. She found work in a nearby town, a small cafe that didn't ask too many questions and paid just enough to keep her moving forward. And for the first time since everything had fallen apart, she had somewhere to return to at the end of the day. Not a parking space she had to choose carefully. Not a place she had to leave before morning, but a door she could unlock without fear. A space that didn't feel temporary, even if she kept telling herself it was. She started cooking again. Simple meals at first, then more thoughtful ones, filling the tiny kitchen with warmth and routine. And with each small act, the life she had lost stopped feeling like something she needed to reclaim, and more like something she had outgrown without realizing it. But the question of why lingered. Why had Aaron kept this from her? Why now? The thoughts surfaced often, especially in quiet moments, but they no longer carried the same sharp edge they once would have. Instead, they felt distant, like a story she had already begun to step out of. And one afternoon, without planning to, she found herself walking the perimeter of the property, noticing things she hadn't paid attention to before. The way of the land stretched beyond what she had first seen. The slight slope near the back. The uneven patch of ground near the foundation that looked almost disturbed. It was curiosity more than intention that made her investigate. She knelt down, brushing away loose dirt, uncovering the corner of something metallic. And for a moment, she hesitated, that familiar instinct rising again, the one that warned her against digging too deep, against uncovering things that might shake her fragile sense of stability. But she ignored it this time, her hand steady as she pulled a small metal box from the ground. It was old, worn, but intact, and inside, carefully folded and protected, were documents. She didn't understand them at first, not fully, but she recognized enough to feel the weight of what she was holding shift almost instantly. Names, dates, signatures, her name written clearly in places she had never seen before, tied to ownership, to rights she didn't know she had. And as she sat there in the dirt, the realization didn't hit her all at once, but in pieces, each one settling in its place with quiet, undeniable clarity. This house wasn't something Aaron had given her. It was something he had never told her about, something that had been hers long before everything fell apart. For a long time, she didn't move, didn't cry, didn't react in any way that matched the size of what she had just uncovered. Because, strangely, it didn't break her. It didn't reopen old wounds or drag her back into anger. Instead, it did something far more unexpected. It closed a door, not physically, but deep inside, in a place she hadn't realized was still waiting for answers, still holding on to questions that no longer mattered. Whatever reasons Aaron had, whether control, fear, or hesitation, they belonged to a version of her life that no longer existed. And for the first time, she understood that she didn't need those explanations to move forward. She was already doing it. The changes came naturally after that, not as a reaction, but as a continuation. She stopped thinking of the tiny house as temporary. She started planting things, small at first, herbs in the kitchen window, then a garden outside, something that required patience, something that couldn't be rushed or forced. And in tending to it, she found a rhythm that felt grounding in a way nothing else had. She added a second chair to the porch, not because she expected anyone, but because the space felt open now, no longer something she was hiding inside, but something she was willing to share. And eventually, people came. Not many, not all at once, but slowly, quietly, like everything else in her life now. A traveler who needed a place to rest for a night. A woman passing through town who recognized something in Maya's quiet presence and asked gently if she could stay a while. Someone who had lost something they didn't yet have words for. Maya didn't ask too many questions. She didn't need to, because she understood, not in the abstract, but in the deeply lived way that only comes from having everything fall apart and choosing, somehow, to keep going anyway. The house began to change with those moments. Not physically at first, but in feeling. It became less about what it had been, less about the mystery of how it came into her life, and more about what it was becoming, a place not just for her, but for anyone who needed a pause, a reset, a quiet space to figure out what came next without the pressure of having it all make sense immediately. She never gave it a formal name, didn't feel the need to define it, but in her mind, she understood what it was. A second beginning. One evening, months later, she sat on the porch as the sun dipped low across the land, the skies stretching wide and open in a way that still caught her off guard sometimes. And in her hand, almost absent-mindedly, she turned the small key over between her fingers, feeling its familiar weight. Its edges softened slightly from time and use, and she realized something then, not suddenly, not dramatically, but with quiet certainty that settled deep within her. The key had never been about the house. Not really. It hadn't been about Aaron, or what he did or didn't give her, or even about what had been hidden from her for so long. It had been about this moment, about the fact that she had lost everything she thought defined her, and still found something else, something steadier, something entirely her own. She didn't need to hold on to the past to understand her present. She didn't need answers to feel complete, because standing there in a life she had built piece by piece, choice by choice, she finally understood something she hadn't known she was searching for. Nothing had been taken from her that she couldn't rebuild, and this time she chose every part of it on purpose. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you want more quiet, honest stories like this one, hit the follow button so the next one finds you.